The click of the classroom door rang softly, signaling the winding down of my lecture. Rows of students scribbled notes or stared blankly into the void, caught somewhere between dutiful attention and the call of their devices. I paced the front of the room, chalk dust trailing from my sleeves, a relic of another era in an otherwise modern world. I could have used the smart board, of course, but there was something about the tactile crunch of chalk on slate that kept me tethered. Perhaps that's why I still lingered in academia, even as the field I once loved drifted into a realm of data mining and corporate sponsorships. I tapped the board where I'd outlined the theoretical life cycle of black holes, is the end point of everything we know, a singularity, the place where all our equations collapse. Beyond it, we speculate, but the truth is, we're as blind as the ancients staring at the night sky, wondering why it was dark. A hand shot up in the middle row, bright-eyed, eager. Freshman, she'd learn. But Dr. Morland, isn't it possible that the buzz of my tablet interrupted, a muted vibration against the lectern? I frowned. Alerts rarely broke through the silencing protocols I set for class. Whatever it was, it couldn't wait. "Excuse me," I said, waving them toward the door. "Read chapter 14. We'll continue Thursday." As the room emptied, I glanced down at the screen. The message was short, clipped. Urgent. New celestial anomaly detected. Immediate consultation requested. A coordinates string followed, along with a timestamp. My pulse quickened as I tapped the attachment. The data resolved into a set of orbital readings, a gravitational signature impossible to misinterpret. It wasn't the black hole itself that struck me first. Black holes exist. They're rare but inevitable consequences of collapsing stars. What caught my breath was its position, an abrupt emergence near Neptune's orbit, and its velocity. It was moving, not drifting with the galaxy's tides, but deliberately, as if drawn by an invisible thread. Worse, it was headed inward. I stared at the numbers for what felt like hours but couldn't have been more than minutes. The gravitational readings were undeniable. The anomaly wasn't a fluke of instrumentation or miscalculation. The universe had shifted, and we were its latest victims. The conference call began less than an hour later. My face flashed across the screen, joining a gallery of esteemed colleagues and bureaucrats. I recognized a few, a Nobel laureate here, an old rival there, but the majority were faces of power, not science. Politicians, military officers, and technocrats whose names I'd only seen in headlines. Their presence unsettled me. "This isn't possible," someone said, his voice thick with a German accent. "A black hole cannot simply appear. They require time, millennia, to form." "Nevertheless, it's here," said another. She looked harried, her image backlit by what I guessed was the control room of a space observatory. "The telemetry confirms it. The mass is approximately 5 solar masses. Its Schwarzschild radius is consistent with a black hole of its size." I cleared my throat. "What's its trajectory?" The woman nodded to someone off-screen and a graphic replaced her feed. The solar system appeared in crisp detail, the familiar dance of planets around the sun disrupted by a blinking red icon near the edge. A dotted line extended from the black hole's position, slicing inward like an accusatory finger. The line intersected with Earth's orbit in precisely 487 days. Silence fell over the virtual room. Even the bureaucrats seemed briefly at a loss. "Let's not jump to conclusions," said a military official, his uniform adorned with so many stars he might have been auditioning for space himself. "This could be some sort of gravitational lensing effect or a rogue star masquerading as—" "It's not," I interrupted. "The gravitational pull is unmistakable. If it were lensing, we'd see distortions in the surrounding light. This isn't a mirage. It's real." "Then explain how it got there, Doctor." The officer shot back, his tone sharp. "Objects don't appear out of thin air." I couldn't explain it. The formation of a black hole required the collapse of a massive star, an event that should have been visible from light years away. There had been no precursor supernova, no neutron star shedding its last gasps of radiation. It was as if the universe had conjured it, a magician pulling disaster from its hat. "I don't know," I admitted. But I can tell you this, it's not natural. That night I found myself on the roof of my apartment building, a place I rarely visited. The city stretched below me, a glittering sprawl of lights and motion. I'd lived here for years, yet the view always struck me as alien, a chaotic grid imposed on the earth. Somewhere in that mess was my son, Max, 16 now, full of all the sharpness and rebellion I lacked at his age. We hadn't spoken in months. I scrolled through the data again, as if rereading it might make it less real. It didn't. Instead, I noticed something I'd overlooked earlier, subtle perturbations in the black hole's path. It wasn't moving in a straight line, but wobbling slightly, as if something was steering it. My thoughts were interrupted by the vibration of my phone. I fumbled it out of my pocket, expecting another message from the Global Astronomical Union. Instead, it was Max. My hand hovered over the screen, uncertain, before I swiped to answer. "Max?" "Yeah," he said, his voice sullen. "Look, I need, answers or something. Mum said you'd know." "Know what?" "About this weird stuff. The news keeps saying something's messing with time or gravity or whatever. My school cancelled exams because everyone's clocks are acting weird. I thought maybe you'd explain it." His words were an anchor in the storm, grounding me in the mundane even as the cosmos unraveled. I tried to sound steady. "It's complicated. Something's happened out by Neptune. A black hole." "That's bad, right?" "It's concerning," I said, carefully choosing my words. "But we're working on it." There was a long silence, then softly, "You always say that. But you're never really here, are you?" The call ended before I could reply. By morning, the news had reached the public. The term black hole trended worldwide, though most headlines veered towards the sensational end of days, cosmic invasion. Scientists scrambled to provide sober explanations, but the truth was, we knew as little as the average person. Only the numbers offered any clarity. The anomalies began soon after. Reports of strange gravitational effects trickled in from across the globe. Lakes surging violently in landlocked regions, rivers reversing course, objects floating inches above the ground before crashing back down, and clocks that refused to stay synchronized. In one particularly bizarre case, a man claimed his dog aged 10 years overnight, its fur whitening as he watched. The world's collective unease grew, and with it, the pressure on scientists like me to provide answers. But answers required understanding, and we were far from that. The only certainty was the black hole's trajectory. Every simulation confirmed the same result: collision. I was at my desk, lost in a sea of calculations, when the summons came. A crisp knock at my office door preceded the entrance of 2 uniformed men. They didn't bother with pleasantries. "Dr. Morland, you're needed aboard the Solstice." I blinked. "The what?" "The joint mission to the anomaly. You've been selected as the lead theoretical consultant." "Selected?" I repeated. "I wasn't even asked." "This isn't optional," the taller of the 2 said. "Pack a bag. You leave in 6 hours." I stared at them, then at the equations sprawled across my desk. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized I hadn't eaten or slept in over 24 hours. The summons shouldn't have surprised me. My expertise was one of the few the mission needed. But the weight of it settled like lead in my stomach. I thought of Max, of our unfinished conversation, and the inevitability of leaving him behind again. "Fine," I said finally, "but I want to make a call first." They nodded, though one of them lingered just outside the door, a silent reminder of my lack of choice. I dialed Max's number, half hoping he wouldn't answer. He didn't. The line rang until it went to voicemail, his voice sounding younger than I remembered. I hung up without leaving a message. 6 hours later, I stood on the launch pad, the silhouette of the Solstice rising against the orange glow of the setting sun. Its refined design was proof of humanity's creativity, a blend of cutting-edge technology and desperate hope. A small crew waited inside, their faces hard to read through the portholes. As the countdown began, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I thought of Max, of the gravity wells we create in our lives and how they pull us apart. Then, with a subtle vibration that intensified into a continuous sound, the spaceship came to life, its engines roaring as we broke through the atmosphere. The Earth fell away beneath us, a shrinking blue sphere, as the solstice carried us towards the unknown. Space had always been the backdrop of my research, a concept confined to numbers and simulations. Now, it surrounded me in every direction, a vast black canvas punctuated by the indifferent light of distant stars. The cabin of the solstice was silent, the kind of silence that crept into your bones if you let it. I sat at my station pretending to study the telemetry feed on my console, though my focus drifted endlessly. We were weeks into the journey, and the novelty of space had already begun to fade for most of the crew. For me, it had never truly taken hold. There was a tension aboard the ship that had nothing to do with our surroundings. It was the mission itself, the weight of knowing we were headed towards something no one truly understood. The first formal meeting of the crew had been a terse affair. Captain David Marks, a career military man whose posture radiated authority, briefed us on operational procedures and emergency protocols. His voice was sharp, confident, but there was an undertone of unease that even he couldn't mask. Across from him sat Dr. Isabel Park, the mission's biologist and, it seemed, the designated optimist of the group. She listened intently, nodding along to his every word, though I caught her casting quick glances at me during the lulls. There were others, engineers, astrophysicists, technicians, but it was Marks and Park who defined the dynamics of the crew. Marks represented the practical, no-nonsense side of the mission, the part that prioritized safety and order. Park, on the other hand, seemed genuinely excited by the prospect of discovery, as if we weren't hurtling toward a cosmic anomaly that could unravel the laws of physics and end life as we knew it. "You look like you're about to disappear into that screen," Park said, pulling me from my thoughts. She was standing just behind me, a grin on her face. I shrugged. "Just running some models, trying to make sense of all this." I gestured vaguely toward the holographic projection of the black hole's trajectory that hovered above my station. "Any luck?" I leaned back in my chair, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Luck's not exactly a factor here. The data's consistent with everything we know about black holes, except how it appeared and why it's moving." She pulled up a seat next to me, her presence oddly grounding. "Maybe we're asking the wrong questions." "And what questions should we be asking?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But sometimes the answer isn't in the numbers. It's in what you feel." Her words hung in the air, an unsettling echo of something I didn't want to consider. Science was supposed to be objective, a shield against the chaos of the unknown. But here, in the shadow of the impossible, objectivity felt like a fragile pretense. As we talked, the ship shuddered slightly, a ripple of vibration that passed through the hull. Marks's voice buzzed over the intercom. "All crew to stations. We've detected an anomaly in the gravitational field ahead." The command center of the Solstice was a cramped but efficient space, filled with consoles and displays that fluctuated with data. Marks stood at the central console, studying the readings. "What do we have?" I asked, stepping up beside him. "Gravitational waves," said one of the engineers, a wiry man named Callahan. "Not natural fluctuations. These are rhythmic." I frowned. "Gravitational waves don't behave like that. They're ripples in space-time caused by massive events, not this," Marks interrupted. "Whatever's causing this, it's not an accident." The room fell into an uneasy silence as the ship's AI translated the waves into visual data. The screen displayed a pattern, a series of signals that formed a complex repeating sequence. It was almost mathematical, but its structure challenged conventional logic. "It's a signal," Park said softly. Mark scowled. "Or bait." The room erupted into debate, voices clashing over whether to approach the source of the waves or steer clear. Marx, predictably, argued for caution, while Park urged exploration. I found myself caught between their perspectives, my instincts at war with my curiosity. The data was undeniable. The waves were too precise to be natural, but the implications were staggering, and I wasn't sure we were ready to face them. As the solstice approached the midpoint of its journey, the black hole remained unseen, a distant distortion hinted at by long-range sensors. I found myself staring at the telemetry more often than I liked, trying to extract some sense of its presence from the abstract numbers and patterns on the screen. The gravitational waves were our first tangible clue. They struck the ship in pulses, weak at first, barely strong enough to register. But as we moved closer, the waves became stronger, forcing us to compensate by recalibrating the stabilizers every few hours. The first encounter came during a routine spacewalk. Callahan and I had been tasked with repairing one of the external sensors, which had been damaged during the wave interference. The blackness of space pressed in around us as we worked, the thrusters on our suits producing the only sound. My breaths were shallow, my pulse pounding in my ears, a constant reminder of the void that surrounded us. "Stay focused," Marx's voice filtered through my helmet. "We can't afford any mistakes." "I'm fine," I muttered, though my hands shook as I secured the replacement module. The gravitational waves had grown more frequent, a constant, disorienting thrum that felt like standing too close to an invisible speaker. As I adjusted the final connection, a ripple passed through my body. It was like standing in the wake of an earthquake, the fabric of reality itself trembling around me. My vision became unclear, and for a moment I was somewhere else. The sensation was impossible to describe. A stretching of time, a fracturing of self. I saw Max older, his face lined with worry. I saw myself, empty-eyed and distant, a shadow of the man I thought I was. And then it was gone. "Morland, report," Marx requested. I shook my head, struggling to reorient myself. I'm fine. Just felt something." "Get back inside," Marx ordered. "Now!" Inside the ship, the crew was on edge. Reports from Earth confirmed that the anomalies were worsening. Entire cities were experiencing temporal distortions, with some regions aging decades in a matter of days while others remained frozen in time. "We need answers," Marx said during the next meeting. "Whatever this thing is, it's affecting Earth, and we're running out of time." Park spoke up. "If it's causing the anomalies, understanding the how and why is critical. Anything else is guessing in the dark." Marx frowned but nodded. "Agreed. But if it's affecting Earth on this scale, we can't afford to guess wrong. We need to figure this out before the situation spirals further." The discussion continued, voices rising and falling as theories were debated, dismissed and debated again. But my mind was elsewhere. The vision during the spacewalk had shaken me more than I cared to admit. It wasn't just the gravitational waves that unsettled me. It was the growing sense that we were dealing with something beyond human understanding. As the meeting ended, I found myself alone in the observation deck, staring out into the void. The gravitational waves had resumed their rhythmic pattern, almost like a heartbeat. I couldn't help but wonder, was it a warning or an invitation? The solstice groaned under the strain of its stabilizers. Gravitational waves rippled across the ship in steady intervals now, like the beat of an enormous, unseen heart. The crew had stopped pretending it was normal. Even Marx, the unshakable soldier, gripped the railings as he moved through the ship. We were close enough that the telemetry filled in more details with each passing hour. And finally, it appeared. The black hole came into view not as a vivid image, but as an absence. It was a wound in the fabric of space, its event horizon bending the light from stars behind it into impossible arcs. It wasn't just dark. It was the absence of dark, an infinite void that seemed to drink in all meaning. Around it, the swirling accretion disk glowed, streams of matter spiraling into the abyss. But it wasn't the black hole itself that arrested our attention, it was the structure. The construct came into focus as we drew closer. At first, it was no more than a vague outline, a shadow against the glowing matter of the accretion disk. But soon, its details emerged. Massive, interlocking rings of an alien material that shimmered with a bluish light. They rotated slowly, as if defying the intense gravitational pull of the black hole. Nothing so fragile should survive in such proximity to the singularity. And yet there it was, as real as the ship beneath our feet. Marks stood at the observation window, his arms crossed. "There's your culprit," he said grimly. Park was beside him, her breath fogging the glass as she leaned forward. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "and impossible." "It's not impossible," I said. "We just don't understand it." Marks turned to me. "Do you understand it enough to say it isn't a threat?" I shook my head. "Not yet. But if it wanted to destroy us, it could have done so already." He grunted, unconvinced. "That doesn't mean it won't." The decision to approach the construct wasn't unanimous. Marks argued against it, warning of potential danger, while Park urged exploration. The rest of the crew was divided, torn between curiosity and self-preservation. In the end, it wasn't a vote that decided the matter. It was the data. The gravitational waves emanating from the construct were getting stronger, destabilizing the ship's systems and interfering with communication with Earth. If we didn't act, we'd lose control entirely. As the ship approached, the construct became more visible in the observation windows, its surface shimmering with patterns that shifted like liquid metal. Sensors couldn't penetrate it, and attempts to analyze its composition returned nothing but static. It was as if the construct didn't exist in the same reality as us, its edges blurring in and out of phase with space-time itself. "Something's wrong," Callahan muttered. "The ship's telemetry is lagging." "What does that mean?" Marks asked. "It means we're moving faster than we should be," I said, my heart sinking. "The construct is pulling us in." We adjusted course, but the pull of the construct was unstoppable, like an invisible tide dragging us closer. It wasn't an attack, not exactly. It felt more like an invitation, though whether it was meant for us specifically or for anything capable of detecting it was unclear. Then the signal came. It wasn't sound or light or anything measurable by human instruments. It was a rhythm, a pulsation that seemed to ripple through the ship and settle directly in my chest. I froze at my station, my breath catching as the pulse repeated, not in any auditory sense, but as something deeper, a sensation that bypassed thought entirely. The room around me seemed faded, and for a moment I felt as if I were suspended in a void, not weightless in the physical sense, but detached, like the signal had reached inside me and stripped away every tether holding me to reality. I pressed my hand to my chest instinctively, trying to anchor myself as a second pulse followed, then a third. Each one resonated more intensely, threading through me like an echo of something vast and unknowable. My mind filled with impressions, not images exactly, but the sense of things. Depth, complexity, a presence. I tried to pull back, to regain control, but the signal felt like it was pulling me forward, as if it wanted something. I barely registered Park's voice at first. "Samuel, are you okay?" Her words were distant, distorted, as if coming through water. I blinked and found myself gripping the edge of my console. The room was still intact, solid, grounded, but the signal lingered, its rhythm threading through my bones. "It's not just a pattern," I managed. My voice sounded far away, detached even to my own ears. "It's alive." Park's face reflected awe and fear. "Alive? How can you tell?" "Because I felt it. It's reaching out to us, or maybe to something else." Marks appeared at my side. "What the hell does that mean? Is it a threat?" The signal wasn't hostile. Not in the sense that we understood, but it was vast, overwhelming, and its intent was impossible to decipher. "It doesn't mean us harm," I said finally. "At least not intentionally. But it's trying to do something, and we're caught in the middle." Marks didn't seem reassured. He straightened and issued orders to the crew. "Prepare the interface chamber. If it's trying to talk, we're going to answer it. But we're doing it my way. Cautiously." The interface chamber was deep within the ship, an insulated space designed for direct connections between the solstice's systems and external anomalies. It was circular, filled with displays that projected data streams. The air felt heavy as I stepped inside, as if the construct's influence extended even here. Marks entered behind me, flanked by 2 crew members in light tactical gear. They held sidearms at their hips, though their tense posture made it clear they didn't expect them to be of much use. Park was already inside, standing by the central console and staring at the displays with wide eyes. "This is ridiculous," she said, shooting Marks an annoyed look. "Guns? Really? If it wanted to kill us," Marks retorted, "it would have already done so, but I'm not taking chances." Park rolled her eyes but didn't argue further. I couldn't blame her for being exasperated. The idea of armed security against something as incomprehensible as the construct was absurd. Still, Marks's caution wasn't entirely misplaced. Whatever the signal was, its sheer scale dwarfed anything we'd ever encountered. Approaching it, even in this controlled environment, felt like staring down an abyss. I took my place at the console and began the connection sequence. As I worked, the displays flickered and shifted, the usual streams of telemetry giving way to unfamiliar patterns. The rhythm of the signal deepened, resonating through the room in a way that pressed against my chest, heavy and insistent. Shapes began to emerge on the displays, geometric forms that twisted and warped, reshaping themselves into configurations that stretched the boundaries of conventional geometry. Park leaned in, her eyes scanning the patterns. "It's trying to say something," she murmured. "But it's not using language, it's conceptual," I finished for her. "It's transmitting ideas, not words. It doesn't think the way we do." Marks frowned. "So how do we talk back?" Communicating with something so alien felt like trying to write a message in the sand while the tide rushed in. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that the signal wasn't just a message. It was a response. We'd observed the black hole, detected its anomalies, and now it was answering us. "I'll need direct interaction with the interface," I said. "Whatever it's showing us, we need to meet it halfway." Marks's brow furrowed, but he didn't stop me. He stepped back, giving me space as I placed my hand on the console. The surface felt cold and smooth, but as the connection engaged, I felt a surge of warmth, then light. The chamber dissolved around me and I was somewhere else. I stood in an infinite expanse surrounded by strands of shimmering light that stretched into the void. Each strand throbbed gently, their rhythms overlapping in a complex hypnotic harmony. I reached out instinctively, my hand brushing against one of the strands, and a wave of impressions surged through me. I saw the black hole, not as a void, but as a nexus, a point of connection between countless dimensions. The construct was its gatekeeper, an ancient mechanism designed to regulate the flow of energy and matter between realities. It wasn't a tool exactly, or even a machine. It was something alive, something ancient and vast that existed on a scale far beyond human understanding. As I moved through the expanse, the strands shifted, forming shapes and patterns inviting me closer. Each one felt like a question, a challenge to understand something beyond my grasp. I reached for another strand, and a vision filled my mind. A lattice of interconnected black holes stretching across the universe, each one a bridge to another place, another time. At the center of the lattice was the construct, its presence holding the network together like the keystone of an arch. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't benign either. It was indifferent, its purpose as unyielding as gravity itself. It was coming, not for us, but because that was its nature, because it was drawn to the bridge like a moth to flame. And we, fragile and small, were caught in its wake. I tried to pull back, to return to the ship, but the construct wasn't finished with me. The strands of light shifted again, forming an image that sent a chill through me. It was Earth, not as it was, but as it could be, fractured and warped by the gravitational ripples emanating from the black hole. Cities twisted into spirals, oceans frozen mid-wave, time stretched and shattered like glass. And then, just as suddenly, the image dissolved. leaving me gasping in the void. When I came back to myself, the interface chamber was spinning. I gripped the console to steady myself, blinking against the after-images of the lattice still seared into my vision. Marks was shouting something, but it took a moment for his words to register. "What happened? What did you see?" I opened my mouth to speak, but my throat was dry, my thoughts still scrambled. "It's not a threat," I managed finally. "At least, not intentionally. But it's coming, and we can't stop it." Marks's expression darkened. "If it's coming, then we have to try." "You don't understand," I said. "It's not something you can fight. It's a force of nature. If we try to interfere, we'll only make it worse." Park placed a hand on my shoulder. "Then what do we do?" I shook my head. "We adapt. We study the waves, figure out their resonance, and introduce countersignals to dampen their impact on Earth. If we can synchronize the anomalies to match the construct's rhythm, we might stabilize spacetime enough to survive the transition." Marks didn't reply, but the tension in the room was thick. I realized just how fragile our situation was, how close we were to breaking under the weight of forces we couldn't comprehend. The black hole was no longer an abstract anomaly, but an inevitable force barreling toward Earth. On every monitor, it was represented by raw numbers, its mass, its velocity, the trajectory that intersected Earth in precisely 364 days. Yet it was more than data. Every pulse of gravitational waves reminded us that it was alive in ways we couldn't understand. The construct wasn't just amplifying those waves, it was driving them, like the metronome of an ancient and unrelenting symphony. Mark stood at the center of the command room, his posture tense, his jaw clenched so tightly I could hear his teeth grinding. "Tell me there's a solution, Morland," he said, his voice sharp and clipped. "I need options." I stared at the screen in front of me, overlaying the black hole's path with Earth's orbital maps. The gravitational distortions were escalating. Entire regions of the planet were now experiencing temporal instability. Some cities reported decades of aging in a matter of hours, while others were trapped in loops, moments repeating endlessly. And the worst was yet to come. The closer the black hole got, the more Earth would be torn apart, not just physically, but across time itself. "There's one option," I said, though the words felt heavy in my mouth. "The construct is controlling the black hole's movement. If we can alter its systems, we might be able to redirect the black hole away from Earth." Marks turned to me. "And how exactly do we do that?" "We interface with it again, directly. The last connection showed me fragments of its design, but this time we'd need to go deeper. If I can align its gravitational waves, I think I can force it to release Earth as its synchronization point." Marks's eyes narrowed. "You think?" "It's not a guarantee," I admitted. "The construct operates on principles we barely understand, but if we do nothing, Earth is finished." Marks's frown deepened, but he nodded. "Fine. But if this goes sideways, we're deploying the nuclear payloads. I won't gamble the survival of the planet on hope." The interface chamber felt colder this time, as if the construct's presence had seeped into the walls. I took my place at the central console, activating the connection sequence. The connection hit me harder this time. The moment my hand made contact, the chamber dissolved around me, replaced by the infinite lattice of the construct's network. The strands of light pulsed with increasing intensity, their rhythms overlapping in chaotic patterns. It was like standing in the center of a symphony that was rapidly spiraling out of control. The construct recognized me. I could feel its attention, not in the way one entity observes another, but as a force, a shift in the currents of the lattice. It wasn't hostile, but it was aware, and it was waiting. I reached out, my hand brushing against one of the strands. The lattice reacted immediately, the strands twisting and rearranging themselves into a new pattern. Images flooded my mind. The black hole, not as a void, but as a nexus, a convergence point where energy and matter flowed between dimensions. The construct wasn't just guiding the black hole, It was amplifying it, shaping its path. I tried to push further, focusing on the patterns that bound the black hole to Earth. The lattice resisted, its rhythms becoming faster and more erratic. It wasn't rejecting me, not entirely, but it was testing me, challenging me to understand something beyond the limits of human perception. A sharp voice cut through the connection, pulling me back into the chamber. It was Mark's. "Morland, report! What's happening?" I gasped, my chest heaving as I tried to steady myself. "It's resisting, but I think I've found the synchronization point. The construct is locked onto Earth's gravitational signature. If I can break that link—" "How?" Marks demanded. "Be specific." The construct systems weren't mechanical in the way we understood. They were more like a living organism, responding to stimuli in ways that were both deliberate and instinctive. "I need to align the gravitational waves manually," I said. "It's like tuning a frequency. If I can match its pattern and shift it, the black hole should change course." Marks didn't respond immediately, but I could see the weight of the decision in his eyes. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Do it. But if this thing so much as twitches in the wrong direction, we're pulling you out." I nodded and turned back to the console. The connection re-engaged, the lattice pulling me in once more. This time, I didn't hesitate. I reached for the strands, letting the patterns flood my mind. They flashed in chaotic rhythms, each one a fragment of a larger design. I focused on the central strand, the one that connected the construct to Earth and was thicker than the others. I reached out and touched the strand, and the construct responded immediately, the lattice flaring with light. I was everywhere at once, floating in the void, standing on Earth, watching the black hole spiral toward its target. The construct wasn't just a bridge. It was a conductor, orchestrating the flow of energy across dimensions, and now it was responding to me. The synchronization process was agonizingly slow. Each adjustment to the strand sent ripples through the lattice, causing the patterns to shift and twist in ways I couldn't predict. The construct resisted at every step, its rhythms getting more erratic as I worked. It wasn't trying to stop me, but it wasn't making it easy either. It felt like an intricate dance, each step requiring precision and timing. As I made the final adjustment, the lattice flared with a blinding light. The central strand began to unravel, its rhythm breaking apart into a series of chaotic pulses. I could feel the black hole shifting, its trajectory altering as the construct released its hold on Earth. The gravitational waves subsided, their intensity fading into the distance. I staggered back, the connection severed abruptly. The interface chamber came back into focus, the noise of the ship's systems grounding me in reality. Marks and Park were at my side immediately. "What happened?" Marks asked. "Did it work?" I nodded. "The black hole. It's moving away. Earth is safe." Park let out a shaky laugh, her shoulders sagging with relief. Marks didn't smile, but I could see the tension leave his posture. The crew erupted into cheers over the comms, their voices a stark contrast to the heavy silence that had hung over us for so long. But even as the room filled with relief, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd only delayed the inevitable. The construct wasn't destroyed. It wasn't even damaged. It had simply released us, its purpose fulfilled for now. The black hole's new trajectory carried it away from the solar system, its immense gravity no longer a threat to Earth. As for the construct, it remained in orbit around the black hole, its interlocking rings glowing in the distance. The solstice recorded its patterns until the last possible moment, but the data offered no answers, only more questions. I stood on the observation deck, staring out at the shrinking figure of the black hole. The rhythmic pulses of the construct signal still echoed in my mind, a reminder of how close we had come to annihilation. I could feel its presence lingering, like a shadow at the edge of my thoughts. "It's not over," I said softly. Park, standing beside me, glanced up. "What do you mean?" The lattice had shown me something during the connection, something I couldn't fully understand. The construct wasn't finished. Its purpose stretched far beyond Earth, beyond our galaxy, beyond anything we could imagine. It wasn't a threat, not yet. But it was a force, and one day, it would move again. "We've bought time," I said finally, "but this is just the beginning." She didn't argue. Together, we watched as the black hole disappeared into the void, the construct a glimmer at its edge. Earth was safe for now, but the universe had only just noticed us, and it wouldn't forget. The return to Earth was unceremonious. No cheering crowds, no celebrations. Only a silent descent through the atmosphere and a cold, grey morning as the solstice touched down on the cracked expanse of the Nevada desert. A team of government officials and scientists awaited us, their faces grim. They knew what we had averted, but the world we returned to wasn't the same one we'd left. The gravitational anomalies had ceased with the black hole's redirection, but the scars they left behind remained. Vast swaths of land were abandoned, rendered uninhabitable by time distortions that warped everything within their borders. A city in Brazil now existed in two timelines, its southern half in perpetual night, its northern half trapped in a looping afternoon. Coastal towns in Europe had been submerged under tides that rose and fell in unnatural rhythms. Humanity survived, but the cost of survival was etched into the fabric of the Earth itself. I sat in a cramped room at the facility where they debriefed us, staring out at the barren desert beyond the window. The light had a strange quality to it, too sharp, as if reality itself was still recovering from what had happened. I picked up the cup of coffee they'd left for me. The lattice of the construct still haunted my mind, its patterns flickering at the edge of my vision whenever I closed my eyes. The knowledge it had imprinted on me was like a shadow, always present but impossible to grasp fully. I knew things I shouldn't have known, saw the universe in ways I couldn't articulate. It was a gift, or maybe a curse. I hadn't decided yet. The door creaked open and Park stepped inside. She looked as exhausted as I felt, her hair tied back haphazardly and dark circles under her eyes. She dropped into the chair across from me, letting out a long sigh. "They're already talking about sending another mission." "To the construct?" I asked. She nodded. "The data we brought back, it's the most significant discovery in human history. They can't resist." "They shouldn't," I said after a long pause. "The construct wasn't malevolent. It was indifferent. It didn't care about us, but it didn't try to hurt us either." Park tilted her head. "And what about the black hole? Do you think it's really gone for good?" "It's moving away," I said, though even as I said it, I felt the doubt creeping in. The construct's purpose was so vast, so alien. The black hole was just one part of a larger design, and we'd only delayed the inevitable. For now, Earth is safe. That's what matters. Park didn't press further. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. "Do you think we'll ever understand it? The construct, the black hole, any of it?" I shook my head. "Not completely. Maybe that's the point. Some things are meant to be beyond us." When I returned home, the first thing I did was call Max. He picked up on the second ring, his voice shaky but alive. It had been months since we'd spoken, but the distance between us melted away in those first words. "Dad," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "You're back." "I'm back," I said, my throat tightening. "How are you holding up?" There was a pause. "Things are weird here. People are scared, but I'm okay." I wanted to tell him everything. To explain the construct, the black hole, the lattice of interdimensional connections that I still couldn't fully comprehend. But instead, I said, "I'm proud of you, Max, and I'm sorry for being gone, for everything." Another pause, then, "It's okay. You saved us, right?" I swallowed hard. "For now." We talked for hours that night, reconnecting in a way I hadn't thought possible. The world was fractured, but in that moment, I felt whole. The construct stayed in my thoughts, a constant presence beneath the surface of my consciousness. Earth had survived, but the anomalies it left behind were a reminder of how fragile our place in the universe truly was. The construct and its lattice were a glimpse of something far greater than us, a reminder that we were just one thread in a vast, incomprehensible web. One night, months after our return, I stood outside and stared up at the sky. The black hole was gone, its light no longer visible even in the most powerful telescopes, but I could still feel its presence. The construct's final signal resonated in my mind, not as a warning but as a promise. We were not alone, and the universe was far larger than we'd ever imagined. That thought didn't terrify me. It humbled me, and maybe it gave me hope.